Hey there, this is Zach from mycodeteacher.com. Today I'm going to teach you how to load a web page into a UI web view in your application. So let's go ahead and open up Xcode and get started. If you go to File, New Project, it's going to be a view-based application, and we're going to title it Web View. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our Resources folder, and we're going to go into the Web View View Controller, and we're going to design our interface. As our page loads up, we're going to need to open up the library. Go into Tools and Library. We're going to have to drag in a UI web view. And we're going to make it just a little bit smaller than the entire height of the entire view because we're going to need to put a bar with a text box and a couple of other buttons in there to actually navigate to the web page we want to go to. So we have our UI web view located in there. Now let's go ahead and add a toolbar. Just drag that right up in there. And as you can see, we already have a default button in there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add two more buttons. And let's go ahead and style these right now. If you go to Tools in the inspector, we're going to get the attributes of each button. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on a specific button. And we're going to make this a refresh button. So if you come down here and hit refresh, it automatically has a built-in icon for that. Now for the second button, we're going to make the identifier a stop button. And for the third one, we're actually going to call this back, because we're going to actually want to be able to go back to the last web page we were viewing. So let's go ahead and drag in a text field to the UI web view. And for the input traits, we're going to actually change the return key to go. So that way when the keyboard comes up, it shows go in the lower right hand corner as a blue button instead of the return key. Makes a little bit more sense when you're navigating to a URL. So now that we've done that, we're also going to need to set the delegate of the text field to files owner. And that's because as soon as we're done navigating and we hit the go button, we're going to have to call a function in the view controller class which will execute the URL command, which we'll build in a second. So we've set the delegate now to the files owner. Now let's go ahead and drag the box right up here in the bar, and we'll drag it up to fill in the rest of the toolbar. Alright, so now that this is done, let's go ahead and open up our class files. We'll open up our web view viewcontroller.h file and begin putting in some properties. We're only going to need two properties. Our first one is going to be an IB outlet for the UI web view, and we're going to call this main web view. And our second IB outlet is going to be for the text box, and that's because we're going to need to know the text that we actually input to the box. We're going to need to be able to retrieve the value from the text box. So let's go ahead and put in UI text field, and we'll call this URL address. Now, like I said before, when you're done typing in the URL, we're going to want to hit the go button, and the keyboard is going to need to call on a function when it's done being edited, and we're going to actually call the text field should return method, and from that function, from within that function, we're going to call another function which we're going to define here, and that's going to be called handle URL request. So let's go ahead and prepare for this function right here. It's going to be of type void, and we're going to type in handle URL request. It's going to pass in a string, which is going to be the URL. So that's all we need to do for the header. So let's go into the main.m file here. So the first thing we want to do when we get into the .m is we're going to create our method that we just declared in the header file, and we're going to call it. So let's go ahead and type in here void handle URL request, and remember we passed in an NS string called URL. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, let's look at some documentation here so I can show you exactly how everything works. If we look at the UI WebView class reference, we'll see that there's going to be 4 methods we're going to actually want to use today. We've got reload, stop loading, load request, and go back, which is right here. So looking at the load request right here, all you need to do is pass in an NSURL request. So to pass in an NSURL request, we have to create an NSURL, and then we're going to need to pass in the NSURL to the NSURL request. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create our NSURL here. So NSURL, site URL we're going to call it, and we're going to need to allocate an instance of the NSURL, and we're going to initialize it with a string, and the string that we're passing in is called URL, so go ahead and end that. Now we need to call the NSURL request, and we're going to call this URL request, and we're going to again need to allocate an instance of this, so we're going to call NSURL request. We're going to allocate that. So we're going to initialize that with the URL already made, which is of type NSURL, as you can see right there. So we're going to call site URL. Okay, so the request is complete, and now all we'll need to do is call the UI WebView, which we've already declared, main WebView, and we're going to call load request. And as you can see, it requires of type NSURL request, which we do have. NSURL request. Okay, so we now have a function that will handle going to a URL that connects with our UI WebView. But seeing that URL is a parameter passed in, we need to be able to call handle URL request with a proper URL. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use the method text field should return, which is going to call this function. And when the text field returns, we're going to get the value of the UI text field and pass it in as the parameter. So let's go ahead and make that function right here. We're going to make it type bool. Text field should return. And it's going to be of type UI text field. And text field. This is a predefined delegate method. If we look in the documentation here, type in UI text field, and we look at the delegate protocol, we'll see text field should return, located right here. So as you can see, this gets called when the return button was pushed. So now let's get back into the code here, and what we're going to do is, it's important, since it's a boolean, the first thing we need to do is return yes, because we do want it to call this method when we hit the return button. And we're going to need to call text field resign first responder. That's basically going to make the keyboard go away when you hit the go button. So now we need to call our method right here, which we just created, handle URL request. So we're going to call self because the function is in this class. So self handle URL request, and we're going to pass in the URL address text. This returns type NSString, this method right here, which is going to pass in as a parameter to the handle URL request, and basically what we type in to the text box is going to pass in handle URL request. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we're going to head back into Interface Builder for a second here. Going to need to connect some outlets here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is click on Files Owner, and you'll see URL address as an outlet, which we've declared in the header. So go ahead and connect that, and we're going to also connect the main web view. So go ahead and drag and connect that. Now everything is connected, so go ahead and save, and we're going to compile it, and we're going to try it out here, see if it works. Now if you click the text box here, let's go to Google. And there you have it. It loads right in just fine. Now, we haven't activated our back button, our stop, or our refresh yet, but that's actually really easy to do. What the main concern is right now is, by default, if you just were to type in, let's go to mycodeteacher.com. We didn't put an HTTP in here, so I'm going to hit that, and nothing is going to happen because it doesn't recognize the web page without the HTTP. So we're going to have to actually check the string to see that the HTTP exists in there, and then we're going to also need to create another method to handle a timeout on if the web page loads or not. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I want to do is go to the handle URL request method, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually make another variable called NSString final URL, and I'm going to set that equal to the original URL. Now there's a nice struct here called NSRange, and what that does is it's going to check an existing string that we pass into it for another string that we give it to check for, and then it's going to give properties in the struct based on what it finds. So for example, we're going to call NSRange here. We're going to set that equal to range, and we're going to call it URL, and we're going to say range of string, which is basically what it's going to search for, and we're going to call http:// end the method here. And now the range variable, which is of type NSRange, has a nice property called location. And if it doesn't find http:// or whatever we plugged in for the range of string anywhere in the string that we passed in, the location is going to be set to NS not found. If it did find it, it's going to give the index of where the string started to be found at. So if it were found 3 or 4 characters over, it would be found on the second or third index, because the very first letter or character in the string is at index 0. So what we need to do is we need to say if range.location is equal to NS not found, or range.location is not equal to 0. Basically, if it didn't find it at all, or if it's found but it wasn't at the beginning, then we need to execute this statement. And what we're going to do is we're going to call it final URL, and we're going to need to append the string and add http:// to the front of the string. So we're going to set http:// as our string, and then we need to do string by appending format, and you need to put the string that you're going to append and put the http:// in front of it at. So now that's going to set the URL, and all we need to do now is, since we created a new final URL, we need to set the site URL and this NS URL to the final URL. Let's go ahead and save, and we're going to test that out. Go to Build and Go. And as you can see now, we'll type in google.com this way, and it loads right in, whereas before it didn't. Now what you can also do, if you're interested, if this is a big bother to you, is you can actually set the text box to whatever the string is after it's been appended. So that way, if you were to type in www.mycodeteacher.com and press enter, it would set the text box to http:// So now that that works, I'm going to show you how easy it is to get the stop and reload and back buttons to work in Interface Builder. The web view in Interface Builder already has received actions, and all we have to do is basically plug these in to the buttons. So if we want to reload the page, we'll just drag this to the reload button. If we want it to stop loading, drag it right there, and if we want to go back a web page, we'll just drag it in right there. And it's as simple as that. So let's go ahead and test that out and make sure that works. So let's say we want to go to mycodeteacher.com. Okay, and now let's go to google.com. Now let's go back a page. Let's test the back button out, and there you have it, it works. Now let's test the refresh, and that works. Now let's check out newyorktimes.com, but while it's loading, I'm going to hit the stop button. Let's go ahead and hit go. Oh, stop. As you can see, it stopped loading all around over here. Half the pictures didn't load. Now let's refresh and see what the whole thing looks like. There's all the pictures and everything that should have loaded before. So our buttons work nice and easy now. Now there's one more thing we need to do, and this is going to be a delegate function of UI WebView. So as shown here in the documentation and the delegate protocol, there's a nice little function which will tell us if the web page failed to load. So that's called WebView did load with error, and we're just going to copy this so we can plug it right in. Okay, so we've pasted that in right here, and now this is going to be called if the web page has trouble loading. So before we can actually use this, we're going to need to set the delegate of the UI WebView to the file's owner. So if you come into your interface builder, select the UI WebView, go ahead and drag your delegate to file's owner here. And once you do that, you can save. And now we need to alert the user if this function is called, because they need to know if the web page couldn't load. So we're going to call a UI alert view here, and we're going to need to allocate an instance of UI alert view. We're going to initialize it with the title and everything else, so don't forget your @ sign when you call the title. We're going to call it error, and the message is going to be cannot connect to web page. Delegate should be self, because we set the delegate to the file's owner of the WebView controller. And the cancel button, we're just going to call it OK. And there's going to be no other button titles. Now all we need to do, we forgot to name the UI alert view here, so we're just going to call this alert. Now we need to show the alert, and we're going to also want to auto release it. So let's go ahead and test this out. Go to build and go. And we'll go to Google just to show that everything's working. And now let's go to some random web page that won't work. And there you have it. Cannot connect to web page. So there you have it. We've got a nice back button that works, a stop, and a reload. So that's going to conclude our tutorial for today. It's actually very easy to put a UI WebView in an application. My name is Zach from mycodeteacher.com. I'll see you next time.